And so you can see, you know, I was laying out the space in which he needed to test out the physics puzzles while I continued to sort of have breathing room around the look and feel of it. Because one of the challenges with Persian miniatures is just simply finding, this is entirely a collage, by the way, right? And so to find high-res facsimiles of miniatures is a challenge. I used the USC library system. I found 14 books. They hardly had anything worth copying. Anything on the internet is, the images are compressed too much or they're too low res to work with. It became very frustrating because there are things I wanted to work with. But we're very fortunate in Los Angeles to have the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, because, which has one of the largest collections of art from the Middle East. I think they call it Islamic art, even though much of the work predates Islam.
Is the design of this poster, forgive my ignorance, but is this indicative of sort of the style of Persian art, having a collage, sort of multi-layered?
Not necessarily collage, but yeah, the miniature style. And I definitely am referencing that.
I just wonder if there's some attributes of Persian art that influence sort of the gameplay, the sort of the collage-y sort of layout kind of thing.
Yeah, so the look of one of the things that the illustrators might see is the perspective in this is all out of whack, not accurate, because miniatures were done before man understood how to properly draw perspective. And so I also used Maya for this, and let me see if I can get down here. So there's all these oil barrels. Now we're creating Maya, right? It's one revolve, copied a bunch of times, one cut in half. But I flattened the perspective to try to match the look of miniatures using the isometric camera at an angle. Makes sense to you guys.
Did you struggle at all with telling the story you wanted to tell while still making it fun and entertaining to play?
Yeah. So one of the things that Peter definitely taught me was to think more about the project than to do work. Right? If you start to go down this path and you don't want to let go of the work, user testing is really a big deal at our school. I'll come back to that if you guys remind me. So no, it wasn't a struggle. You know, I think for Peter, maybe the challenge was, you know, as a game designer, that he wants to make a game that's challenging enough for other game designers. That's his audience. But I felt that the audience for this was much broader, and so I was the one asking to dumb it down is the wrong word. Make it easier. Make it more accessible to a wider audience. Our target audience is American students. So I can come back to that too.
So there's also the educational component, and you know, the question of balancing the story with the idea of playing a game, but also like actually people coming away with some knowledge about this event and its significance. How do you? I mean, I have no concept of. Except, you know, like when you write a story, you want to like convey a plot and a narrative, and you use details. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that ultimate educational component, because for me, this is really compelling as a tool.
Yeah, thank you. In the lab, we've made a lot of these edutainment games, and we just find like. Just to remind you know, on topics like sexual harassment and gerrymandering, immunology, cultural sensitivity, spiritual enlightenment, which if you guys want to see Bill Villa's work about that project too. And most of these are enormous efforts with a huge back end supporting whatever it is we're trying to teach. So the immunology game, which I'll show you guys too, is very directly supposed to reference the chapters 11 through 13 of the 11th grade biology textbook, right? So that was very easy to sort of use that aesthetic and play off of that. In other words, if you understood the lesson in class out of the textbook, then you could win this game. But it was this enormous effort. And the thing is, you know, you guys are playing this on the computer and there's Google, right? And this is a politically charged story, right? So we didn't want people to dismiss it because they saw it as propaganda. So the experiment as a learning game in this case was to make it short enough to keep you interested And by the end, what we saw is people would finish playing this game, and they'd go, I don't know what he's talking about, who is most adept, and they would Google his name. And so we just motivated someone to learn it for themselves. That's a big thing.
You have a target audience age in mind?
We didn't. It was just really Americans who don't know this story, right? Iranians know this story. It's so critical. Obama has really, recently, I guess when he was inaugurated the first time, he mentioned this. It was the first time I think it was acknowledged by a president. In 2000, the documents were leaked to the New York Times. And it was just last month or the month before that the CIA actually acknowledged that those were accurate, that it was true 60 years later. So we didn't want, we didn't want you guys to dismiss this, even though it seems obvious. But the story's all online, and some of the harsh criticism we got was people saying, I didn't learn a damn thing. This is what he was trying to teach. And now they're not just learning this subject, but they're actually trying to teach other people. We use some words like you heard Peter say, match this, and we use the word Shah. In testing, people didn't know what Shah was. I was shocked that you guys didn't know that means king and implies a monarchy. So there was these opportunities for the players of the game through these walkthroughs to really teach other people. And so I think that's some pretty effective ways of teaching, right? Self-motivated. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
So one of the things that I found that was really interesting about this was that in the playthrough of it, it really is a puzzler. You're trying to figure things out. It drew my attention a lot away from the text, and sometimes I wasn't always able to read the text because I was playing the puzzle. But
that definitely showed up in
and there was a really nice balance to that. But then in the sort of the reprise of it at the end, I sat and read through all of the text. And it was partially because I felt that I was connected to it.
Yeah. On the way down, we actually had voiceover too, and in testing, nobody was really reading it. Exactly what you pointed out. So user testing is critical. I don't know how many of you actually consider yourselves artists, but this image we have of artists of sort of working by themselves and then releasing whatever their creations to the world. That's definitely not how we operate. It's one of the advantages we have in working with digital media. We don't have to. There's no final. There's only there's final. I don't know if you guys have those names in your file names. And there's the final. And this is the really final. So we can continue to sort of update it as we learn things. And we learn so much in slowly releasing this game versus an alpha. We have feedback from Iran, gamers in Iran who were able to play this game for free, and what they said made it into the game. Every time we got to show it at a conference, they didn't know I was making the game, the guy that was playing at these exhibits, and so I'd watch the way they interacted with it, and that made it into the game. So I think it's critical why are you showing it if you don't care about your audience? I guess I'm sort of referencing, what I see as the typical artist. You had a question.
So creating this game, you didn't have any bias, like you didn't have an opinion you wanted to put on the players. It was just you play it, learn the story, and then develop your own opinion yourself. Or when you're creating it at first, did you have maybe more like feeling behind the whole thing?
It's a documentary game, and as much as you guys might think they are not. My battery's almost? Okay. What was I trying to teach? Documentary games are not objective, but they carry this baggage, right? People think that they are supposedly objective. And so, for me, as the son of an Iranian father and the son of an American mother, I felt like I had to keep it in balance in that way. I had to be true to it in that way. There's definitely an underlying agenda. It's not as sinister as maybe you guys might think. It was really to let you guys know about this moment in history, because even as Churchill has pointed out, one of his famous quotes, I'm not going to paraphrase it because I can't remember it exactly, that Americans will ultimately do the right thing after they exhaust all the other options. And so I really feel that, and you know, I'm not a big fan of Churchill, in particular with this story, but my father went to school, and boarding school in England, and so he's pretty English also. And so, you know, I was trying to be fair in some ways, but I did put the floating hat over Churchill's head. So you know, I am pointing a few fingers. And going back to your question, is part of the reason we use miniatures and the you know, the Mohassis's influence is that he did a set of work criticizing the talking about the Pahlavi dynasty called Life in Iran. But he dressed them in the clothing of the previous dynasty, really making it more broad, statement about monarchy, perhaps. And so that, it gave us that option too, using Persian miniatures. And there was plenty of fighting and conflict in miniatures, in particular in the Shahnameh.
We had another question back here.
Yes.
Batya?
Well, I just wondered, like, what did Iranians like think of it? Like, how did they receive it?
They were really happy, I think, that we made it. There's a 5-minute video that they made. I could show you guys if you'd like.
Yeah. Who's they?
So there's 2 game magazines in Iran. One of them is printed. Both of them have done stories on this. One of them is printed and I think has to go through some kind of sort of review by the government. The second one is entirely online, Game eMag. That's game spelled backwards, eMag. Electronic magazine. I thought that was pretty nice. And those guys reviewed the alpha version, and I'm going to find that for you.
Should I be concerned about recording copyrighted content?
No, don't do that.
Okay.
Obviously, I didn't. So this is the translated version. After they released the Persian language one, we asked them to translate it. So there's some mistakes in the translation, but it's very insightful. I found. Fatemi, who isn't in the game, but I'm going to show you how we made it into the printed version of the game. And I think that's where we're going to go to next. So there's Fatemi right there. And also in the photograph that's in the horse. And so they, he was the guy that was, from my understanding, and persons couldn't help, it was the guy that was actually the architect for this this brand of democracy in Iran. And he was the most vocal, and he was the one that was actually executed from the coup, a real martyr, I felt. And so that's why he's got this. You know, in miniatures, this gold fire is like their halo, you know, that we see in illuminated manuscripts of the Western tradition. So that was, you know, very directly because of him. And the reason I picked this particular image, if you can see it up here, right where the cursor is, you know, it's basically looking at miniatures and trying to find some relationship to the history of the 1950s and recontextualizing it. And the reason I picked this particular image to represent Fatemi is because and miniatures are done, you know, a production line style, and you can see whoever it is that worked on this miniature forgot to paint in the helmet. And I kind of felt like that was most Fatemi's story, that his story was never able to really be finished told because of what happened. And it's, you know, this guy on the horse is holding this this line, and you can see there's a line coming from his head. So, you know, sometimes these are pretty abstract connections, but for me they make sense, and that sort of drives the decisions I make regarding the pacing, or the metaphors used in this game. So this set of slides, go ahead.
I was going to say, some of the students, I know some of the students have class in about 10 minutes, and I wonder if we could open up to some,
please, yes.
some more questions if you guys have them. And I actually have one that I was going to ask. I know that the film, if I remember correctly, the film Persepolis was received kind of weird by the Iranian government, or was kind of banned or something. Is that correct?
I don't know if it was banned,
banned,
but she's definitely not going back to the country.
Right.
Because
And
she's
so,
so vocal.
yeah, so I mean, it's interesting to see this sort of documentary type of game thing, or a film or comic book, and see how the medium can be used to not only depict, I guess, historical events, but also it's kind of refreshing to see a change from just fighting sort of things, or superhero kind of comic books, or different film stuff. Do you have other topics in mind for your next projects?
I was saying this earlier. My goal is to be a one-hit wonder in many fields. So games, check. I'm moving on. And the next thing I'm going to do is what you guys saw in the hallway earlier, body script, which is really the convergence of cinematic arts and performing arts. But I do want to go back to one thing you said, which is that this game, Mossadegh story in Iran is not anti-IRI, Islamic Republic of Iran.
Right.
Early on, actually, it was that's what motivated people to go out in the streets and as a group have this mass uprising against this what had turned into an absolute dictatorship, absolute monarchy. And so I've had two invitations to go to Iran, one from the government itself, and the other one from the animation branch of ASIFA, which, I don't know if you guys know about this, this International Organization of Animation. I haven't gone back. I don't trust them. I don't trust that I will come back if I were to go. And I can't trust myself to edit myself. I've been here 35 years now. I'm going to get myself into trouble. So it's you know, on the line. It both supports their argument that the West is partly responsible for the life and politics in Iran. So it's not necessarily anti-Iran because it's so critical of the CIA.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm in a different place than Marjan, but still, it's just hard to. I'm dying to go back. I was born there, lived there till I was 11 years old, and have not been back since. And I know it's a different place, but I still want to go back and see my old house, see my old school. And one day, and maybe partly because of this game.
Are you planning on having any sort of cultural ties into your upcoming projects, or are you kind of just going in different directions now?
I don't think you can, once you dive into this really rich Persian culture, you can't leave it behind. I think it's going to continue to influence my work, and just like games. I may not make another game, but there will be a game component to everything I do because each of these mediums and aesthetics is really ideal. It's a perfect match for certain goals. Games teach systems better than any other medium. And this is not, we're not teaching a system here, but if I was trying to teach a system, and one of the games we're making in the game lab is a suite of games called College